bought the book. I don't know, you know, I'll read it at some point, or
That's how
as
I
a
feel.
refresher. You know.
I keep telling myself, no more books. It goes on Kindle, and it's just too easy to hit that, you know,
Kindle.
button, that Kindle button,
Yeah.
have it, or
Yeah.
Amazon,
Yeah.
and have it pop up on my screen. So
Yeah.
it's like, so dangerous.
No, I think it was worth adding to my libraries.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, final lesson. What I'd like, so Gary, this time we'll just, as I think you and I talked the last time we talked about this, you can just show the videos, you don't have to show everything else. But first of all, of course, I'd like somebody else to lead the prayer this time, or to read the prayer this time that we've been saying at the very beginning. Jim, you seem to be the one who has that available. Look at this. Jim wants an A+.
No, Bev actually had these hanging up when I went home.
That's awesome.
And I think she should be on there because she wasn't feeling good this morning.
Hi, Bev.
Yeah, all you get is her.
She's not on here yet.
She's not on there yet. She may not have gotten out of bed yet. Let us pray. Oh God, send me this day to do the work you have given me to do, to love and serve you with gladness and singleness of heart. Amen.
Amen.
This is an interesting lesson this week, I think. I'd like to start out by just having everybody sit quietly for a moment and close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that. And I'd like for you to imagine, if you will, what paradise is for you. It may not, some people don't see pictures of things like that in their mind, but describing to yourself, what would paradise be? By the way, I use paradise and heaven sort of synonymously. I use paradise and heaven synonymously. So would anybody like to share with us what paradise or heaven looks like for you, or feels like, or however you can describe it?
I see it as, see myself going to heaven and see God welcoming in at the gates and saying, come on in, servant. And good job.
I see it as above Timberline at a place like Trail Ridge Road, being there and having one or two people for whom who have died already grieving. I don't know that they're necessarily in a human form.
I don't have a visualization, I just have a sensation. I always associate receiving the Eucharist with heaven, and it's that moment. It's that moment that we're told is the foretaste of heaven when you receive communion from clergy, layperson. It's just that whole experience. It's, for me, it's almost
Visceral?
it's almost an out-of-body type experience. Yeah. Not every time. I shouldn't say I'm, that tuned into it, but definitely there's a scale, but it's definitely that sense that feeling that I'm communing with God and all the saints and Jesus.
I think of a cabin on a lake with enough neighbors, but not too many neighbors.
Today it was pretty interesting. I was on the drive in. Sun was coming up on the east, obviously, and it was beautiful. And I was craving to get all the buildings out of the way and be in a field like in Nebraska or someplace, or even on the eastern side of the state, and just in the springtime, picturing it with grains, growing and just the wind and being at peace with that. And I couldn't get that out of my mind when we were thinking about this. So that's what it means to me today. And how we need to be reflective of that, be present with that, because it really, like you, Mary, it's really special.
Started about 7 o'clock.
It was beautiful.
Same experience, get the buildings.
Yeah. Put me in that field, and wow, that was really precious. Yeah.
It always reminds me when I wanted to go see all the Pac-12 cities that had football teams, and we were driving up into Pullman, Washington, 2-lane road, and they have no fences, and the green fields were right down to the road, and it was almost harvest time. It was beautiful.
Well, thank you all for those of you who for sharing your vision of heaven or paradise. Gary, do you want to share? Yeah, I didn't want to cut you off.
I haven't thought about it too much, but I think of it as hoping that God will read me and that I'll see my mother and father. I came from a very small family, no siblings, no cousins, but I guess I haven't really thought about it too much. But I hope that God will consider me good enough to not go to hell.
Of course. Thank you all for sharing. It is relevant to our. But also, I think it's a good exercise because I don't think about it very much.
It's gonna come.
I had that experience when I watched it on my computer. I had to keep clicking next. Oh, you're already there, so yeah. It should. try advancing the,
showed up to this farmer's market in all of Seattle as it heard about the gentle practice. When one of my first students for these gentle practices, Judy, heard about the gentle practice of looking at each human face and remembering that they are a person, she was reminded of one of the most beautiful things she ever saw. She was up in Seattle visiting her sister, and they went out to a farmer's market. And Seattle, as it often is between October and June, was covered in gray clouds, not a bit of sun in sight, and it had been like that for weeks. She showed up to this farmer's market, and all of a sudden the sun came out, and she said she saw everybody there, the people shopping, merchants, everyone, turn their face to look to the sun, because that's what their bodies wanted to do. What I've been suggesting with these gentle practices is that they eventually help your soul tune itself to the place where it wants to be, which is your sacred eternal home with God. In this final set of talks, we're going to be talking about shifting from being disciples, that is, people that practice the disciplines that Jesus taught, to pilgrims, that is, people who know ourselves to be on the way to our eternal home with God. So again, a disciple is one who practices the disciplines, the practices that Jesus taught, and praying, worshiping, serving the poor, and so on, and then the gentle practices that we've been doing so far in this class. So our daily prayer, "O God, send me this day to do the work you have given me to do, to love and serve you with gladness and singleness of heart." Saying the work is very near you in times of transition, remembering that each face is a person. Naming each work, getting away from multitasking. The practice of Sabbath reflection with the prayer that begins, "O God, in your light we see light." Your secret angelic smile, reminding you of beauty and gratitude, and ways to use that wound in your side such that you grow in love. The final practice now is naming your spiritual home. In centering prayer, Thomas Keating teaches you to pick a word and use it to ever so gently nudge aside thoughts. And once you've picked a word, you stick with the word. That's the word of the practice. I'm going to invite you to do the same thing by reflecting on 4 things in your life. The thin spaces that you've encountered, memories of journeys that were times of transition from one place to another, songs that you find particularly stirring, and then to chew on words that you find to be particularly mysterious and rich. So this is the final shift of the work of this book and these classes, shifting from being a disciple to being a pilgrim towards the kingdom of God. The name that you choose for your pilgrimage is important because it's one that you're going to live with for a very long time. Just taken from scripture, it can be a mountain like Sinai or Zion, or if you've been to Greece, it could be Athos, or it could be Compostela, a real place, or it could be something more mystical like Dante's Celestial Rose. What we're trying to do is I'm inviting you to dare to name a place that will be your lodestar, the place that's going to move you forward from where you are now into a deeper experience of God.
so how do you understand the difference between being a pilgrim and being a disciple in this context? Had you ever even thought about that? I hadn't, certainly had.
Just the words, always sort of contextual. Pilgrim is somebody who's going someplace, and a disciple is a follower. And those are two different things.
Right, yeah.
I thought about that when I came back to Denver, because one of my bosses, every time he saw me, he said, well, good morning, Pilgrim. And I didn't know whether that was positive. and finally, I asked him one day, and he said, well, I heard that you were involved in the church and doing things, so I just decided I was going to call you Pilgrim. And it kind of, it just surprised me.
To me, pilgrim sort of implies an open mind and a questioning mind, even though you may be on a journey and you may have an end goal of your home or your spiritual home or whatever that might be. At the end, you are engaging with questions and you're thinking about things in a different way, just like this class has kind of opened up a different way of looking at things for me that I never even considered, and maybe challenging some of those deeply held traditions that you think are really important. It's not that they are no longer important, but you're looking at them in a different way. So definitely a questioning mind frame.
I always wondered what my calling was, and it seemed like to be on vestries and be a senior warden. And I always saw those things as being more of a disciple. And when I got into really getting close to God and doing Faith Alive weekends and doing Alpha and going on retreats, that's where I felt much more like a pilgrim.
So, pilgrim sort of implies a knowing, like you have a direction, right? You know where you're going. I'm clearly not a pilgrim. But what kind of knowledge or what kind of knowing do you think that is? Is it, so as it says in the question, is that a rational knowing or emotional knowing, a knowledge of God, the afterlife, or something else?
See, I always associated the knowing with what I was doing with vestries and with senior warden type things like that. I always associated pilgrim with not knowing, trusting in God to lead you to where God wanted you to go versus you knowing where you wanted to go. But I'm not trying to.
No, I'm not, hey. In a certain way, I can understand thinking that way, which the shift here for me is the concept of knowing, like you're going toward the top of this mountain, or you're drawing closer to God.
You have a goal.
Exactly.
That's what I would think. Pilgrim means that you have a focus and you know what you want to, where you want to go, or what you want to find. It seems to me.
Or even maybe if you can't articulate what the goal is, it's and knowing that there is something, God.
I think of, I haven't done it, but I think of sort of the Camino, that there's a goal, you're going to get to Santiago, but it's all the stuff that happens along the way. When you get up and when you get there, when you get off the bus or the train or whatever.
Yeah, the challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Can I physically make this?
Or the experiences.
Yeah.
Experiences that you're going to
Encounters.
Yeah, I think of pilgrimage involving many more unknowns that part of that journey is not knowing. Whereas disciple, especially the way Christopher Martin talked about it, following a discipline seems more ordered. And so maybe pilgrimage is maybe less ordered on that journey.
So like the Canterbury Tales, the pilgrims had a destination for sure. They had a purpose for what they were doing, but all the stuff happened on the trail, so which is out of their control. So that's sort of my viewpoint. It's almost sort of a literary conceit.
So then does being a disciple necessarily come before being a pilgrim? Does it come in conjunction with being a pilgrim? Does it lead to becoming a pilgrim, potentially? Or all of the above? I don't think there's, personally, FYI, I don't think there's a right answer to that. I think we all experience it in different ways. But thinking about what you said about discipline, perhaps, for example, being a disciple, developing those disciplines, going on short hikes, or like with Gary, training, going on the shorter bike rides. You have an ultimate goal, right? At the end of your ride.
On the short ones?
No, well, but on your sabbatical ride, you have a goal.
Yeah, Santa Monica.
Okay. So the shorter rides are sort of your disciplines.
Yeah.
To help.
There's a little bit of that, but it's also making sure that the body will work.
Well,
for a long time, yeah. So there's the discipline to do that
to make sure your body works.
I would see sort of discipline and or discipling and pilgrimage is kind of overlapping circles. There might be a place in the middle, but I'm thinking of Jesus' disciples. I don't think of them as being on a pilgrimage. They were being taught and corrected and all of that. Whereas it seems to me that, and that's a master-disciple kind of relationship. That's very different than a pilgrimage where you just say, I'm going to walk from here to Santiago, and I'm going to stay in different places every night, and I'm going to be seeing people that I've never seen, and I'm going to drop my backpack in the river, and and all of these things, and what am I taking away from that? So I see that you could do it as part of the group with a teacher, but you could also do it by yourself. So I see it as kind of overlapping.
But I would say, if you're working on discipleship, it's more an internal discussion between you and God, and what you're trying to do, what God may want you to be doing. And the pilgrimage is what you do because of that, what's going on externally, where you dare to travel, what you dare to do. It may not even be a destination, it just might be, I'll take this job and do it as a Christian, or I'll, whatever. I'm going to go beyond my comfort zone and try this out and find out what God's up to out there.
I always remember on some of the retreats I've done where they talk about the Holy Spirit, and you talk about what is the Holy Spirit, and then you talk about how do you know what is the Holy Spirit, and then you experience the Holy Spirit. And that's, as you get through there, you're moving toward closer to God. And as you're trying to experience the Holy Spirit, everybody's going to experience it totally differently. And that's where some of the most amazing things happened in my life, where, it was God, it wasn't me.
But it often, almost always, it seems to me, the true surprises that the Holy Spirit has delivered have been because I was out doing something or attempting to do something.
Yeah, from a personal perspective, I sort of agree with what you're saying, because I can think in my own life, okay, I'm formed in discipleship, and I think about all the years I went down to St. Francis Center and worked, and that for me was a pilgrimage, because that was totally stepping out of my suburban life and going down and being with people down there and forming relationships even with people down there. And that was a pilgrimage, and that was really a spiritual pilgrimage for me. And so I would have never taken that pilgrimage if I had not had the discipleship formation to begin with. So I tend to agree with your.
And what you said about the disciples, they were disciples until they left home.
That reminds me of my years I worked at St. Clair's, and all the time I was standing behind that wall. It was more like a discipleship. And when I decided I was going to take my lunch break and go out and sit with the people, that was a pilgrimage.
Yeah, exactly. It is. Yeah. It is. Yeah. Yeah, it is. And being asked to do things that are just totally out of your everyday life, like helping trans people find appropriate clothing, which throw that out as an example. Not just unhoused people, but people really in a difficult place and trying to find clothing they identified that they could wear. So that's a pilgrimage for sure. I agree.
So the disciples, I mean, if the legend is true, St. Thomas ended up in India. I mean, getting there must have been full of encounters with people and the whole way along that is very uncomfortable. If indeed he did.
Well, and you have to learn something from those encounters too, as part of the pilgrimage. It's not that you're just an unwilling participant in this milieu. You know, you have to be affected in some way. And then you're formed as a disciple on your pilgrimage.
You're
Right.
You're
changing,
reinforcing it. It does change you, and I think it broadens the horizons of what you thought, whatever you thought discipleship was.
I think they happen at different intervals of our walk and our journey with Jesus. For sure. And again, like you were talking about, Nadine, is do we pause and reflect on even the differences of being a pilgrim versus a disciple, right? We get so caught up in stuff, it just gets in the way.
We ready for the next?
You want number two?
Yeah, please.
I'm going to invite you to try various exercises with your memory and your imagination to start getting the feel of what this name might be for you. In this talk, I want to invite you to reflect on two things: thin spaces in your life and important journeys that you've taken. Thin spaces are spaces where the boundary between earth and heaven seems thin. Heaven is almost palpable. So I ask you to think about, what are the thin spaces in your life? Some of the thin spaces in my life are my church. I love my church, St. Paul's. It's a Carpenter Gothic church with old stained glass windows that has the dignity of a Gothic church from England, but the warmth of West Coast wood. And it's almost always darker, but in a warm way than the world outside. The way that the light hits the stained glass window and causes an almost thick light to be inside is magical to me. And in addition, I like to add a little bit of scent to it. So I sometimes burn some incense sticks of pure frankincense inside the church. And all of these things combined make it seem like a thin space to me. This desk from which I'm presenting this teaching is a thin space for me. It's the place where I pray every morning. And so because of years of praying in this desk, and it's kind of worn down in some areas, it's a place that when I sit down, I know I can feel myself going into a place of prayer rather quickly. One of my friends, Rual, is a man on death row, and he very deliberately turns his cell into a thin space twice a year. He usually likes to go out onto the yard to play dominoes and shoot basketball and be with his friends. But twice a year, he puts away all of his books and his television and all the rest of it, and he follows what he calls his J plan. And he stays in there, he fasts, he prays, he does extra exercise, he reads scripture more than usual. And in addition to that, he's well behaved enough that he could go to North Seg, which is for the best behaved on death row, but he chooses to stay where he is, both because he's prayed into that cell and also because, coincidentally, the cell next to his has been converted into a chapel, a multi-faith chapel, so that almost every day there are groups of men in that cell next to Rual's cell praying. And he wrote to me that when that happens, I must be the luckiest man on death row. So attend to those places that are thin spaces for you. It may be known spaces in your daily life. It may also be places like great cathedrals or places in the outdoors where you've experienced the joy and beauty and awe of creation. It can be a retreat center, but remember what those places are like and what they feel like when you're there. The other thing I want you to remember is particularly important journeys that you've taken, where there's been a transition from one place to another. A very important journey for me was taking the Camino across northern Spain to Santiago de Compostela, which I did over the course of 3 weeks with a friend. Every day, all I did was get up and walk all day in the direction of my pilgrim destination, Santiago de Compostela. And I felt as I was walking that burdens that I didn't even know I was carrying were being slowly dropped off and life was becoming clearer. That's a journey that I think of when I think of what my ultimate home is going to be. Another journey that I took that was incredibly important was, well, I grew up in the East Coast, went to college in the East Coast, but accepted a job on the West Coast in 1999 in Los Angeles. And my wife had to stay behind longer than I did in order to finish up some work. So I got into the car by myself and for 5 days drove across America. And I brought all sorts of books on tape and the rest of it. But much to my surprise, I spent most of the time in silence, reflecting on this big transition in my life, moving from one coast to another to begin a new career and a new life. That time of silence is one that I can remember still, especially driving across the beautiful landscape of America. These times of transition can be known as liminal spaces. People who are being prepared for baptism during Lent are very deliberately put into a liminal space so that, for example, when they come to worship on Sundays, they are brought up to the altar at the end of the liturgy of the word and salt is put on their tongues to make them thirsty and long for even more, which they know that they will get when they come to the other side of their baptism. That's the kind of longing that we're going to be nurturing as we shift from being disciples to being pilgrims to our true home with God.
So have you ever thought about thin spaces in your life or heard that term, and some of us have, and what, knowing now what that is, if you didn't already, can you think of some thin spaces that you've experienced in your life?
The chapel at St. Anne's, was a stable. And the sisters arrived on the land that was given to them to nurse children, but they immediately converted the stable to a chapel. And of course, they prayed the hours there. And I swear they prayed it right into the bricks. There's just, it's truly amazing. So there's a thin space that I'm in.
I think the one case that comes up for me is I remember when I chaired the calling for one of our search committee for one of the priests here, and I did that because it was something I had never done. I thought, oh, this ought to be fun. Well, most of you probably don't know this, but we had 40 candidates for the priest here, and we ultimately got down to 10, and we got down to 3, and then 2. The problem was at that point, our committee was evenly divided on the 2 people. And I was doing a Faith Alive weekend in Houston, Texas, and they asked me what I wanted to pray for, and I said, I just want God to show us who they want to be our rector, and I'm not sure how we'll ever get out of this. And I flew home the next day, and my phone was ringing as I walked in, and it was one of the people on the committee, and he said, one of our 2 candidates has withdrawn his name. And I just thought, it's gotta be a God thing, yeah, because we were deadlocked, and I just was amazed. For me, that was a real thin space.
Have you ever gone looking for a thin space?
There's a pilgrimage. There's a pilgrimage.
I don't know if you go looking for them. I think they just happen. For me personally.
Okay. Are there things in your life that, places that you go or whatever that make you feel closer to God? Are those thin spaces?
For me, it's New Mexico. I don't know, there is something about that place. It is so spiritual, and I know it has a lot of politics between the indigenous people and the Spanish people, and there's a lot of undercurrent that I've learned from people who live there. But I think New Mexico is a very thin place, and it reveals itself. I would say a thin place reveals itself to you, just like people find the Celtic world in space.
I think of 2 rivers in Rocky Mountain National Park. St. Vrain, which comes down through, what's that entrance? It's not the main entrance. Yes, the one by Allen's, yeah. And then Fall River, right at the end of right at the base of Little Blue Fan. Because you walk through these places and there's meadow and willows and water and sandbanks, and you may see a moose or you may see or something like that, and you don't know what you're going to see. The sandbanks in the water have changed over the year because the way too much rain or too little rain has changed. But they're similar, but different, and I love both of them. Places to be.
I can't remember the name of it, but there's a camping area just out of Colorado Springs that is where Bonnie Spencer worked, and we did a number of family retreats there. And when you do family retreats there and you spend the whole weekend, you build relationships that probably stay with you the rest of your life. And I've often thought it's too bad we stopped doing family retreats, because there's things that happen on those retreats that You can't plan, they just happen, and to me, those are God things.
I think of thin spaces when I've kind of been taken out of myself. One was when my daughter was in labor, and just that kind of just emptying yourself was, for me, that was a thin space.
Have you ever heard a song or seen a piece of art that made you feel closer to God? And those thin spaces? Karen, I was thinking of when you were talking about sometimes when you're taking communion and the stars align and everything, and you have that special feeling that's
That connection,
yeah.
you can, it's the foretaste of heaven, that's the
Right.
best way to experience it, kind of all the senses. Yeah, definitely there's art pieces, I can't think of any, but I
Well,
definitely
I
have
just
moments,
just
yeah,
some
yeah,
thoughts.
it's the same sort of thing.
I actually I have experiences of thin space, I think, many times when I'm at St. Clair's. Particularly now that I'm there more often and I'm not there to do as much as I am there to be.
And that may be the definition of how you find it.
Is to be. And that also then ties back in with the previous lessons about basically mindfulness, by my definition, but taking the time to do one thing at a time and being open and, ready to be a vessel or whatever, ready for whatever the encounter might be. Really hard to do sometimes.
I think there are times in our lives where we have to be the other, just to, the whole, whatever, depends on our getting it done, but,
Sure.
but there are times when you go and wait to see what will happen. Are very open, using all the techniques you know to heal.
He talks about Jeremy's, he's talked about his case of moving from the East Coast to the West Coast, and I have a parallel to that. I actually switched companies, and when I was in Chicago and accepted a position in Bakersfield, California, and I thought I was going to work for that company my whole career and then retired. And I got 10 years in, and most people didn't know, well, how could you go from Chicago to Bakersfield, California? And when they hear the story, they understand, because Bev's folks were in San Jose and my folks were in just north of Phoenix and Prescott, and it was a perfect location because both families were having medical issues. And I almost think that was a God issue, of God being there and helping me make that decision, because I couldn't imagine myself quitting a company. I was right in the position, moving up, and everything was great, and I had to go to Chicago to make sure I was okay, and left that and went to Bakersfield, and it really worked out well for me. And I've often thought back on, why did I do that? I think, to me, it was least partially, is certainly a God issue for me. So that's a journey for me.
Yeah, I really like it.
There are two other exercises that I invite you to practice as you discover your word for your eternal home with God. I just shared with you to remember thin spaces and journeys. This time I invite you to think about songs that are particularly important to you and begin using them as the soundtrack for your daily life. And then also just to chew on certain words that may have the kind of resonance that you're looking for. So when it comes to songs, one place to begin, of course, is with hymns. Are there hymns that you find particularly stirring and meaningful? I can think of three that have been useful for me. One is a hymn that's very frequently used at funerals, but most powerfully for me was a hymn that we chose on the evening of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, the day that we got attacked and that the Twin Towers fell. We gathered as a community. This was in Los Angeles. The church was absolutely packed. And no surprise, we chose the hymn, "O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter in the stormy blast, and our eternal home." Just those words and the thought of that tune brings tears to my eyes, and also the kind of longing that we are to nurture as we become spiritual pilgrims. Another favorite of mine is "Jerusalem, My Happy Home," which we frequently sing during times when we're sharing communion. And that's so appropriate because communion is a foretaste of the heavenly banquet. And it's a song that I find so stirring and enveloping and welcoming that I want it sung at my funeral in the hopes that, in fact, I'm there in the eternal Jerusalem. Another song that I find even more stirring is the great old Isaac Watts tune, "We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion, the beautiful city of God." I find that stirring and particularly helpful as a sort of earworm or soundtrack to my daily life to think about staying on pilgrimage. Because why? Because I'm marching to Zion. So those were hymns, but they don't need to be hymns. There can be other songs that stir that kind of longing in you. For example, I was part of an a cappella singing group that had a gorgeous arrangement of the American folk tune Shenandoah. And when I hear that song, I've never been, I don't think, to Shenandoah, but it stirs in me a longing for that place. There's something about the arrangement with its lush chords. "Oh, Shenandoah, I long to see you." Singing those words, hearing those sounds, stirs the same kind of longing for my eternal home. So songs are one place to tap into to discover what that word is for you, but then also to give you a benevolent soundtrack during the day to keep you on track. So there's finally choosing the word itself. What we're looking for is a word that has resonance and mystery. So for example, a word that works well for me is the word Zion. I already mentioned the hymn, "We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion." But I also know that the way it functions in Scripture is that it is an echo of the word Jerusalem. So for example, in one of the Psalms, Psalms 147, it says, "Worship the Lord, O Jerusalem, praise your God, O Zion." And they mean the same thing. Zion's the name of the hill upon which Jerusalem is built. But for me, the word Zion doesn't evoke just that earthly city of Jerusalem, but evokes the heavenly city of Jerusalem. But I like to call it Zion because it has that extra oomph to it. And finally, I associate, and this may only be a personal association, the word Zion with Black churches. And so I imagine, as I'm marching to Zion, that I'm marching side by side with my Black sisters and brothers to a mountain, to a city, to a place where the lie of race has no place. And so it taps into a deep yearning in my soul for ultimate healing and reconciliation. So as you're looking for a word, you're looking for a word like Zion that's capable of having multiple resonances. So this is a creative search for you.
So since we're getting so close to the end of our time together, I don't want to spend time on this one, particularly because the final video wraps things up, and I'd like to be able to discuss a couple of things to wrap this whole course up. But I think for me, just remembering that what he's getting at, which I'm not settled with yet, is that we're trying to find a word and a place, envisioning a place where we're close to God, or this is our journey or our pilgrimage to God. We're selecting a word that evokes that and gives us, to me, what feels like a sense of a goal, more of a sense of a goal, and then songs that help inspire us to go to that place. And I invite you to give that some thought. When I did it, I came up with a whole list of songs and listened to them on YouTube. Anyway, I hope you all are okay with that.
I end where we began. In this earthly life, you are body and soul. I am body and soul in a way that is mysterious, how those two things come together. But right now, we are both. If you've ever been at the bedside of somebody who is dying and has died, you know that in the moment of death, something leaves them. That face is no longer the face of the one you love. Something has left. I believe, we are free to believe as Christians, that that essential thing is that person's soul. And by God's grace, that person's soul is now with God eternally. In the meantime, we who are alive are both body and soul. And the purpose of these gentle practices all along has been to improve the posture of your soul. So I want to conclude by suggesting a few things that put our body and soul together. In the very beginning, I taught you about your Camino boots, that you were to strap on your Camino boots of your two Christian practices of prayer and worship. Daily prayer, weekly worship. One is an inner practice, daily prayer. The other is an outer practice that you do with other people, the one of worship. I'm left-footed, like that's what I kick a soccer ball with. So I put daily prayer on my left side, inner practice, and the outer practice, worship, on my right side. Now we're going to add some more practices to our body. In the book of Hebrews, which is a book that's written to people who are on their way but are faltering and they're getting tired. They're on their way to Zion, to Jerusalem, to whatever it is. And the writer admonishes them to strengthen their weak knees. So I'm going to propose that you put two practices in your knees. In your left knee, if you're going to follow my lead, the inner knee, marinating, soaking yourself in scripture so that the living word shapes your imagination. And on your right knee, you put in the practice of being in a small group. And particularly, I recommend a discipleship group that works on 7 core Christian practices, a small group that meets every week, an inner practice and outer practice. Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, admonishes us to bear one another's burdens and in this way fulfill the law of Christ. Where do we bear one another's burdens? I'm suggesting we bear them in our shoulders with 2 practices, one of which is about money, the other of which is about time. For the left shoulder, the inner practice is generosity, working towards the tithe. For the right shoulder, the one that's about outer practice, regular service to our neighbors, particularly our neighbors who are on the margins, who are the least, who are the poor, who are most in need. So, bearing one another's burdens through our money, bearing one another's burdens through giving of our time. Those are 6 general practices. We've also added gentle practices through the course of the book or through the course of these classes. One is in our side, right here by our heart, where the wound is, where we use our wound for the sake of others, for the sake of love. We've also had practices that have been centered in our head. So we've got the smile, our secret angelic smile, that helps us to remember beauty and so live gratitude. Our eyes are invited to look at each human face and remember that they are a person, capital P, capital E, capital R, capital S, capital O, capital N. And then there have been lots of things in between our ears, particularly, for example, naming each work that you do, working against our tendency to multitask, doing one thing at a time, enabling us to begin to live with gladness and singleness of heart. Each of these practices, these gentle practices, have been an invitation of this book and an invitation of these classes, both of which are a way to live in our bodies as body and soul. Strong bodies on a pilgrim way, strong souls on a pilgrim way. Remember, it's not only the people that you are looking at their face, who are these theotropic enigmas. You and I, too, are theotropic enigmas. God created us to go towards God mysteriously. I pray that the gentle practices of this book have enabled you to live even more deeply with gladness and singleness of heart, and to become a pilgrim headed towards your eternal home with God.
So I guess my one question, since we're pretty much, our time is up, my one question is, has your understanding of how God calls people changed over the course of these 5 lessons? Are there any of the things that you learned that resonate with you more, that you're more apt to practice than others, or some that you just absolutely, there's no way you're not going to do that?
For me, it would be the way to approach people you're having difficulty with, or people you dislike for some sort of reason. I mean, that I forgot, I have to go back and look at my handouts, but the suggestion he had to look at them in a different way. Do you remember that?
Well, that wasn't that the capital P, capital E, that, and then if you have a difficult time looking at them, to look away from them.
Yeah, there was something else. He had a phrase, a turn of phrase that was really apt. Sure. And I would say, yeah, definitely through this material, I looked, I feel a different understanding of how God calls people.
I want you to write a paper about that.
And when is it due?
Not.
I think what it has done for me personally, it makes you go back and reflect on your own life and when you've gone through these times. And what I found when I reflected is when I felt called to do something and when God called me to do something.
You don't have to play anymore, so any more videos, so. Okey doke, thank you all very much.